Hello there. Welcome in to a Friday edition of the show. So glad to have you, whether you're listening on your radio, streaming the show online at extrasports1300.com, or you've downloaded the free Extra Sports 1300 app, sponsored by Diversus Health and Mental Health and Well-Being for All. A veritable cornucopia of sports topics coming your way over the course of the next 90 minutes. Air Force and Army on the ice coming up at 4:30. If you'd like to get your say in before the weekend, we'll talk divisional playoffs a little bit later, mostly local stuff here early on. But I'd love your thoughts on this Friday, 719-247-1313. Call or text it in. Let's start with the Avs here, because about a week and a half ago, I proclaimed that the Colorado Avalanche were finally playing like a Stanley Cup contender. And that this stretch of games that they are embarking on would be kind of that next level. It's one thing to be in that conversation, which I think the Avalanche deserve to be now that they have acquired the goaltenders and are getting the goaltending that they've gotten. I think you could say with that goaltending, with three of the best players in the world, that they're in that conversation with an Edmonton, with a Dallas, with a Winnipeg, and put whatever other teams you want to put in there. But there's kind of that next level of, okay, you're in the conversation, but are you at the top of that list? Are you somewhere in the middle? Or are you kind of, to use a phrase with March Madness, like the last one in? Well, we've seen them get blanked by Winnipeg with Connor Hellebuck in goal. And last night against the Edmonton Oilers, another team that would certainly be considered on the short list of Stanley Cup contenders, they blow a 3-goal lead and lose at home in a game. First of all, it's rare that this team blows a lead. I mean, I think this is just 9 blown leads this season. And for it to be a 3-goal lead and give it up, that's very, I would say, venture to guess it's only happened maybe once or not at all this season. But a game that, yes, the late first period goal by Edmonton changed that game. Avs jumped out. Nathan McKinnon with a couple of goals. Logan O'Connor gets one. They're rolling. Edmonton scores one late in the first period. And certainly we've seen that before. Last 2 minutes of a period, first 2 minutes of the next period, it does swing the momentum. And the Avalanche just could never get it back after Edmonton got that goal. If they go into the room up 3-0, maybe there's a different outcome. But I watched this team last night. They just look tired. You know, with the Edmonton Oilers, they are going to wear you out. They are going to pin you in your own zone and make you defend. And that second goal that they scored last night, Brett Kulak's goal, the Avs were defending in their own zone. It seemed like forever. And Kiviranta, I think, tries to clear a puck, doesn't do a good enough job of it. It's gloved down to the ice by Kulak. He fires and they score. And then things got really tight after that. You know the way Edmonton's going to play. It's not something that the Avalanche have been ill-equipped to deal with in the past. They look, and I'll I'll add the Rangers game to this as well. A win and a comeback win. But the Rangers are a mess right now. I mean, credit to the Avalanche for beating Igor Shesterkin enough. But New York's not a good team right now. Okay, they're not going to provide the resistance that an Edmonton or Winnipeg would. They just look tired to me. And I wonder if the emotional roller coaster they've been on, that you thought they got off with solving the goaltending issues, but you also throw in how much winning they've done, right? And how much winning they've needed to do, right? That stretch that goes through the holidays, right? History tells you wherever you feel like you want to be towards the end of the season, you got to be within arm's reach of that when January rolls around, because there's just not usually a ton of change in the standings. Teams are pretty well established. As much as we look forward to the trade deadline, there are very few franchise-altering moves that are made. You establish who you are in the first part of the schedule till the calendar changes. And I think that was the urgency behind the Avs making the deals for the two goaltenders. They wanted to establish who they were. And they started comparatively to where Winnipeg started in such a deep hole that they had to do all this winning just to be able to say when this month rolled around that, hey, we got a shot. And and to their credit, they did. But you wonder how much that taxed this team. Because now you're going up against teams that are going to provide a ton of resistance. You got Winnipeg a couple nights ago. Edmonton last night. You got Dallas tomorrow. You got Winnipeg again coming up next week. These are the teams that if the Avs are going to go to a Stanley Cup, they got to go through. These are the best teams in the Western Conference that the Avs are now going against, and they just look worn out from racking up these wins, maybe a little bit residual of carrying poor goaltending. That they just look tired to me. And here's Jared Bednar on his thoughts on his team for the last 10 days.
We're just not firing on all cylinders, right? And it's been better part of a week, so gotta fix it. Yeah, well, like right now we have to fire on all cylinders to win. That's just what it is, and we're not. So gotta keep going to work.
And that last point there is an important one. The Avs could be Stanley Cup contenders, but the unavoidable bar to clear or to get to for any Avalanche team in the near future is going to be the Stanley Cup winning team, right? We're naturally going to look. That's what a Stanley Cup winning team look like in Colorado. What does every team look like compared to that? That team, and I don't have to tell you this, but I'll reiterate it, that team was a wagon. That team was much better than their opponent. And last night is a great example of that, right? Edmonton is not radically different than they were a couple of years ago. It's still McDavid and it's still Draisaitl and a lot of these same players. They've made some changes to their depth, but essentially who the Oilers are and who leads them on a nightly basis is the same team that the Avs swept a few years ago. They're not so much better than everyone else, even with the changes they've made and gotten better goaltending than they have had in the last couple of years. they're still not overwhelmingly better than all these teams. They're just in the mix. They're in the same conversation as Edmonton and Winnipeg and Dallas. They're not clearly better than them. It does take their best game to beat these teams. And we're just not seeing the best of the Colorado Avalanche in these last couple of games against these other contenders. Now, part of it is the talent certainly on this team is not rising to the occasion per Jared Bednar, what you just heard from him. Not firing on all cylinders. What are you going to do with Casey Middlestat? Last night, they move him down. They put Mikko Rantanen as the second line center. It works out, you have to say, right? Because Mikko Rantanen sets up Logan O'Connor for the game's first goal. That second line looked pretty strong last night. Certainly the top line was. But that didn't seem to light a spark. The bottom two lines were not effective last night. So that might not be the answer for the Casey Middlestat question. It may not be, hey, let's send a message or let's put him, less ice time, not those high leverage situations. Let's take the pressure off while at the same time kind of putting the pressure on that, hey, we're going to move you down the pecking order if you don't produce. It didn't work last night. Whatever the main driver of that decision was, it helped out the Avs second line, but it didn't help out Casey Middlestat. And so now today at practice, you have Middlestat back up with the top six with Arturi Lehkonen and Jonathan Drouin. Mikko Rantanen's back with Nathan MacKinnon, and now they're going to elevate Ross Colton. Because moving Casey Middlestat down there did not spark the lower lines, did not spark a Ross Colton. So they're going to put him back up where he was so good to begin the season. And Valeri Nichushkin's return is on the horizon. I hate to make it so much about one player, but it really is. It really is right now. The missing piece with this Avalanche team to go from a team that's in the conversation of being a Stanley Cup contender to being maybe top of that list or near the top of that list is Casey Middlestat and providing a strong top six. And the Avalanche are just not getting it. And it's put more on Mikko Rantanen and Nathan MacKinnon to lead the way, and credit to them, they have. Nathan MacKinnon right now is the MVP frontrunner, in my opinion. And I think given what the Avalanche had to deal with this year and the fact that he's leading, because I said this last year, I'm not totally beholden to the idea that the Art Ross winner has to win the MVP. I don't like that automatic, because then why have two different trophies? Okay, I'm not always beholden to the best. And the same thing's going on right now with the NFL MVP debate. Lamar Jackson doesn't have to win because he has the best numbers. It's fine if you want to make that argument, but it doesn't have to be that way. Even if he wasn't leading the league in points, there would be an MVP argument for Nathan MacKinnon, given how difficult the early part of the season was and the fact that the Avs were able to win as many games as they did, which wasn't a ton, but at least it kept them hanging around, there would be an MVP case anyway. And oh, by the way, he's also leading the league in points. So if he wins the Art Ross, he's going to win the MVP. But you're not going to look at Edmonton as an example. How many years did they have the best player on planet Earth and maybe the third or fourth best player on planet Earth, and they didn't get anywhere? It's got to be more than McKinnon and Rantanen and Makar. It's got to be more than the goaltending. A lot of stuff has to come together for a team to win a Stanley Cup. And right now, the Avs are just, you think that they have the right personnel, but just the consistency is not there outside of the big three. But the good news is they're still getting the goaltending. Mackenzie Blackwood played certainly well enough for the team to win the game. In fact, the game would have tilted more in Edmonton's favor earlier had it not been for Mackenzie Blackwood. So even going up against these other elite teams, Blackwood's doing his job. That's great to see. Now it's time for this team to really take off and beat the best teams in the league. And they have another chance to do it tomorrow afternoon against the Dallas Stars. Take your thoughts on last night for the Avs. 719-24-7-1313. Coming up next, the Broncos have found their scapegoat. Time to plan your big game party by placing your pre-order with Hooters. Give 50 boneless wings for $79.99 or 50 bone-in wings for $89.99. You can also watch the big game at Hooters on February 9th for a chance to win a custom engraved Hooters Colorado Solo Stove. Be sure to make Hooters a part of your big game plans. We'll talk about the divisional playoffs coming up in a little bit, but first, kind of a surprising move today from the Denver Broncos. But also, when you really ponder it, maybe it's not that surprising. You know, the inkling, given the season that the Broncos had, would be, oh, run it back. Run it back, but improve. Right? No need to sacrifice anybody. No need to find a scapegoat. Everything was fine. Now you just need to take what you have and add to it. Nobody was calling for anybody to get fired, but Sean Payton said somebody's going to get fired. And that person is special teams coordinator Ben Kadwika. Now, there's a very unsexy, not emotional reason for him getting fired. He was kind of a package deal with Mike Westhoff, who is this special teams guru. And when Westhoff stepped away for health reasons, perhaps Sean Payton was like, yeah, I'm going to look in a different direction. But Sean Payton doesn't really strike me as that kind of a guy. To just be like, yeah, you know, it was good, but because everything tells you that the Broncos special teams was hardly the issue this year. Right? Marvin Mims, all-pro, Pro Bowler. Will Lutz, best season since Jason Elam. There were very few games this year where you're like, oh, Broncos special teams really letting him down. Except one. And that was the Kansas City game, where the Kansas City Chiefs saw on film the weakness on the left side of the Broncos line. And when Will Lutz lined up for what would have been a game-winning field goal, the Kansas City Chiefs exploited it. Sean Payton just the other day said this.
There's a lot of confidence in this team. If we could get past that game, the next game we had to play, we felt real good about.
He felt like the Broncos would have beaten the Kansas City Chiefs this weekend had they played them, which it also stands to reason that he very much believed that they should have beaten Kansas City in Arrowhead earlier this season. And the reason why they didn't was because of special teams. So if the next step for this team is to beat Kansas City, not their backups, but actually beat the Kansas City Chiefs, which then it would be reasonable to say, well, if they can beat the Chiefs, then they should win the division, right? So if all of this makes sense, which it does, I'm not saying that the Broncos can next year. I'm just saying I'm following Sean Payton's thought process here. Maybe one of the reasons why you didn't do that this year was because of special teams. Now, this isn't vindictive Sean Payton, but this is holding a little bit of a grudge. I guess maybe I am saying is vindictive. I think he's looking at it and saying we can do better. Okay, that was obviously a game that sticks in Sean Payton's craw, so much so that he unsolicited brought up this fantasy in which the Denver Broncos go into Arrowhead this weekend and clinch a spot in the AFC Championship. So clearly the pass game against the Kansas City Chiefs, the real one, not the one week 18, the real game against the Kansas City Chiefs, has stuck with them a little bit. Good and bad. Good because he was confident they would win. Bad because they had a chance to win and they didn't. So this is Sean Payton saying clearly what the next step of this football team is. And what may be keeping us from this step, in part, is some mistakes in special teams, especially in that game against Kansas City. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to bring in somebody that I think is better, and we'll tighten it up that much more. That's why why that loss, I think, drives Sean Payton crazy. It's not as much about who it was to. That's part of it. But it was how they lost. This Broncos team this year made the playoffs because they won in the margins. Those little things that pop up in film that ESPN's analysts don't pick up on, that local radio talk show hosts don't pick up on, but good coaches do. Andy Reid and Dave Taub picked up on it. Those are the things that Sean Payton is supposed to be able to exploit, not that other teams exploit with the Sean Payton team. So, yes, it's who they lost to. It's a signal of we only lost that game because of this, so we're going to fix this. But it's also the fact that the Broncos lost a game on the margins. And that does not sit well with Sean Payton. So he's going to bring in somebody that will help them win in that margin consistently and against the team that they need to do that the most against, which is Kansas City. And obvious lines are being pointed towards Darren Rizzi, who is the interim head coach of the New Orleans Saints. He's not going to get that head coaching gig. So Sean Payton will do what he has done since he arrived and bring in his people. So there's football reasons for it. There's, Sean Payton anger reasons to it. But a little surprising because overall you would say the special teams component of the Denver Broncos was good this year. But they weren't in the game that maybe they needed to be the most, at least during the regular season. Got more on the Broncos coming up at the top of the hour. Why I don't think that the Broncos are going to be going on a wild spending spree, especially to get Bo Nix additional weapons. But in the meantime, speaking of money, apparently, reportedly, Deion Sanders flirting with the Dallas Cowboys is about money, at least in part, but it's not his money that he's apparently worried about. I'll explain next on Extra Sports 1300. To the text line, Broncos firing their special teams coordinator who did not fix the issue with the left side of the line, allowing the Kansas City Chiefs to beat them. Chris weighs in and says, Sean and the Broncos should concentrate on the game in front of them instead of possible future games. Then they might actually win that game instead of possibly the next. It was just so unnecessary for Sean Payton to say what he said the other day. So unnecessary, and I don't believe it's based in reality. Now, the idea that they would be confident going against Kansas City, I would buy that the Broncos would have confidence, but this insinuation, and it was a clear insinuation from Sean Payton that they would have beaten the Kansas City Chiefs. That he has the formula. Right? Buffalo doesn't. Baltimore doesn't. These two teams that are head and shoulders above the Denver Broncos. They can't beat the Kansas City Chiefs, but Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos can. This Denver Broncos team. It's just, I disagree vehemently with that insinuation from Sean Payton. They would not have gone into Arrowhead the next week and won. But it is such, to Chris's point, like, look, I don't think they were looking ahead beyond Buffalo at all. But it's such an easy thing to do when you know that that game's never going to be played. Right? Playing the hypothetical game. If we would have beaten a team that is much better than us in one of the most difficult stadiums to play, if we would have done that, then we would have also won this game. It's such an easy thing to do, but is also so unbecoming of a head coach. But let's be real. A lot of things that Sean Payton does and says, you would consider that. He runs up the score. He trashes other NFL head coaches. So even though I feel like it's unbecoming of a head coach in the NFL to play this ridiculous hypothetical game, it is on brand for Sean Payton. But when he does these things, he's not just spouting out at the mouth. I will at least give him that level of credit. He's not just running his mouth. He's doing it for a reason. He is setting the expectation for next year. He is saying, we're beating that team. We're winning the division. That's my expectation for next year. And also, what do we say about Buffalo? What do we say about Baltimore when they go up against Kansas City? You watch these teams play them, and you wonder sometimes if there is an intimidation factor or a, oh, here we go again factor. There's a mental thing with Buffalo and Baltimore. There just is. It doesn't mean they can't get over it. But watch those two games last year, especially the Baltimore game, and you can't come away with any other conclusion than mentally Baltimore needs to work on some things if they're going to knock off Kansas City. Playing Kansas City gets Buffalo and Baltimore to make uncharacteristic mistakes, to abandon who they are as a team. And here's Sean Payton saying who we are, what we do. It's good enough. We can do it the way we are. Baltimore and Buffalo have shown you in years past that they don't believe who they are or what they do is good enough to beat Kansas City. But here's Sean Payton saying what we do and who we are is good enough. So I could disagree with his assertion. I could say that it's unnecessary. And it is not something that I think is a productive thing for a head coach to do. But when I really drill down into it and think about the intent behind it, this could be, it could be said behind the scenes. Right? He could say this to his team. Maybe he felt like he had to go public with it, just to further drive it home and have his players go, whoa, okay, our coach feels this way and he's willing to put himself out there. I disagree with the sentiment. I disagree with the assertion, the insinuation. And I think that he is a little bit delusional. However, I do understand why he said it. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Like, this comment has stuck with me all week, and it's like, he is wrong. He is incorrect. The hubris of this guy to say something like that, but at the same time, I get why he's doing it, and he's doing it a little bit his own ego, but he's also doing it for his team. But he's wrong. Like, they weren't going to beat Buffalo. They wouldn't beat Kansas City. They wouldn't beat Baltimore. They wouldn't beat Detroit. There's a whole host of teams in these playoffs that the Denver Broncos would have virtually no chance in beating. But what's that? Was it G.I. Joe? Knowing is half the battle. When it comes to potentially at some point dethroning the Kansas City Chiefs, just like the New England Patriots before them, believing is half the battle. Now it's just a matter of the Broncos got to be a better football team next year. And the firing of their special teams coordinator perhaps has a little bit to do with that. All right. So yesterday we're talking about Deion Sanders and why he's doing this. Why would he consider the Dallas head coaching gig to the point where Ed Werder is reporting that Deion will take the job if Jerry Jones offers it? What is this truly about? Because just a little while ago, just about a week ago, Deion Sanders was saying that the only way he'd consider it is if he got to coach both of his sons, something that is an improbability bordering on impossibility in Detroit or Dallas. It would also be improbability bordering on impossibility in Detroit as well. But in Dallas, it's not going to happen. So why would he consider this? And he got a text in yesterday and said, this is a ploy to get more money. And I said, I don't think that's what this is about. And I think the texter and I can both be right if this latest report is true. Because it could be about money, just not for Deion. Jane Slater reporting that Deion Sanders went to Rick George, the athletic director at CU, and asked for more money for both NIL and assistant coaches. And Rick George was not very amenable to the idea. So it could be about money, but not money for Deion Sanders. Money for NIL and money for assistant coaches. Which, that's the most important money that you can get, honestly. In today's world of college football, more money for NIL, more money for assistant coaches, especially someone like Deion Sanders. Right? More of a CEO type. I'm not trying to disparage his coaching ability. He's not the second coming of Bill Belichick as a tactician. We know this, but he is a more of a CEO type who I think has grown into the role of a head coach. There are some things that he did this year, especially regarding clock management, that I thought was better. But the archetype of head coach that he is more of a CEO. And a lot of the credit for the Buffs' success this year has to also be given to his two coordinators. So I think Deion Sanders asking for more money to put in both of these buckets is a wise thing. It's what you're going to have to do. If this report is true, I don't think that Deion Sanders is wrong. What is this team going to do to get closer, to continue the momentum that they are building up as a program without the best player in college football and the best quarterback in college football? That's a lot for any team to overcome. How are they going to do it? By getting better players at literally every other position. I don't know if Julian Lewis is going to ever be better than Shedeur was. I think I don't want to put a hard ceiling on this kid. I want to allow him to go into Boulder and to grow and to improve, and maybe he can be by the time he's done. But by the time he's done, there's a lot that can happen in the meantime. We know that the Buffs quarterback next year, and it's probably actually not even going to be Lewis, it's probably going to be the transfer they got from Liberty. Either way, he's not going to be better than Shedeur. And there's no one that's going to step onto the field at Folsom in September that's going to be better than Travis Hunter. There may never be a better player to ever play in the Colorado football program that's better than Travis Hunter. But you have to keep doing it. You have to keep replenishing the coffers. You have to shell out more money. That's what it takes. And there's no reason to think with what CU has been able to do with high school recruiting, with the transfer portal, to say that they are stingy. Right? So we can't, because of this report, characterize Rick George as penny pinching. Okay, they're not. Look at the guys they're bringing in, and why do you think they're coming here? Yeah, NIL is a big part of it. But Deion Sanders is saying we need more, and he's not wrong. He's not wrong. Now, nobody wants to hear this stuff. You are in a salary cap less sport. When you're in European soccer, when you're in Major League Baseball, and when you're in college football, nobody wants to hear about financial restrictions. Nobody has the patience for it. There are some situations where you understand it, but you don't want to like openly talk about it and let that be an excuse. You're allowed to spend as much money as you have. Right? So nobody wants to hear that, oh, we can't spend enough money. In a sport where there is no limit to the amount you can spend. If CU is serious about contending for a national championship, they're just going to have to spend more. They're just going to have to. That's the way that this works. So maybe this is and I don't even know how we would find out if eventually this happens. I mean, I guess we could see if Deion Sanders poaches Chip Kelly from Ohio State, then maybe he got the money he wanted for his assistant coaches and upgraded from Pat Shurmur. There will be signs, but I don't know it's going to be announced that CU has agreed to give Deion Sanders X number of more dollars for NIL or for his assistant coaches. Maybe we'll find out. But and this is the best explanation I have so far. If this is what it is, okay. Still doesn't mean he's serious about taking the Dallas job. But it would make more sense that he's trying to get more money for NIL and for his assistant coaches than getting more money for him. The things that CU allows him to do to generate revenue, to generate income for himself. Who do you think gets the money when you go into Dick's Sporting Goods and buy something that says Coach Prime on it? Or who do you think gets most of that money? So it wouldn't make sense to me that Deion Sanders is just using Dallas as leverage to get his own higher contract. It would make much more sense if he's trying to get it for NIL and getting it for his assistant coaches. And that's ultimately how Colorado is going to contend for a national title. Because that's how every team in America has to do it. 719-247-1313. And I'm watching TV right now in studio. Jordan Schultz is on FS1 talking about Deion going to Dallas. This isn't going around. This isn't going away. This will jump the weekend. We'll be talking about next week for sure. 719-247-1313. Coming up next, why, if you're hoping for a major acquisition this offseason for the Denver Broncos to help out Bo Nix, you may be a bit disappointed. Welcome in Drive Time Sports on this Friday. Never ceases to amaze me that we can have a day as gorgeous as this, immediately followed by the most miserable weekend that we will have to suffer through for a very long time. But that's what it's shaping up to be. So enjoy the sunshine and the decent temperatures while they last, because they are not. And on that happy note, Brian Kaufman with you. 719-247. 1313 is the number if you would like to get in here. Air Force hockey against Army coming up at the bottom of the hour. So now that all the capitulation and everything like that from the Denver Broncos about what might have been, what was, now it's time for what will be. What are the Denver Broncos going to be next year and beyond? Well, that all depends on what they do in the offseason, wouldn't you agree? So for those offseason plans, we turn to Greg Penner, who has shown in his short time as owner of the Denver Broncos that he will spare no expense to make sure that this team gets to where it needs to go, but kind of a different tune the other day.
It's a different situation again, and we're going to have a little more cap space. Our needs are different. You know, we have a young nucleus and a great quarterback to build around, and we haven't set yet what our approach to free agency will be, but if it's appropriate, we'll be aggressive, but I'm not sure that we'll need to do that.
The natural inclination when you have a season like the Broncos had is to spend. Like Jacksonville Jaguars a couple years ago, right? Got Trevor Lawrence. Yeah, the first year was awful with Urban Meyer and all that. But then they went out and they spend and get all these weapons and improve this team so much. And it does get them going in a much better direction. That's the natural inclination. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the Broncos don't need to improve the roster. They 100% do. But how they do that is what's going to be fascinating about this. I direct your attention back to the comments made by Sean Payton around the trade deadline. When asked about the lack of moves the team made, said Superman's not walking through that door. Sean Payton likes what he has. And it's hard to argue with that sentiment given this season. I don't think he wants to alter what he's got going for the sake of, trying to make a jump in a splash in free agency. The Broncos are building up this roster the right way. Right? The right way that not only leads to a more surefire path to success, but also sustained success. Teams that go out and spend like drunk sailors in free agency get an initial bump because you're just bringing in that much talent. Of course, you're going to be better. But look at Jacksonville as a perfect example. Did they sustain that success? They got that initial 1 year bump and then they settled back down. And now they're a team looking for a new head coach, and people are wondering if they're ever going to figure it out with Trevor Lawrence. The Denver Broncos do want to build this thing the right way. And when they were aggressive in free agency and spent a lot of money, it was to address positions that aren't that splashy, but are so important, right? The offensive and the defensive line. That's where they spend that, get that foundation, that scaffolding, if you will, put in. So the Broncos would be strong in the trenches. Then they go and get Bo Nix, the right quarterback for what Sean Payton wants to do. And then you see it all work like it did this year. Well, that scaffolding, that foundation is still there. Your offensive line is intact. You have Zach Allen. You got John Franklin Myers. You have good pieces on the other side of the football on that line. I don't see the Denver Broncos going out and paying top of market dollar for T. Higgins or Chris Godwin. I don't see it, because also what comes with a high price wide receiver is an ego. And maybe it's not Antonio Brown's ego, but it's an ego, right? Already wide receivers have that ingrained in them, that they want the ball. They deserve the ball. It is their right to get the ball. And then you pay them a bunch of money to catch balls for you. What do you think's going to happen when they don't? When they're not getting passes thrown their way? Part of the Broncos' success, as much as we can look at the wide receivers and say they're not good enough, and there's a lot of truth to that, part of the Broncos' success offensively is that they didn't have a guy they had to feed. Sean Payton, I think, likes the idea that he can pick somebody out given the matchup they have. It can be matchup based, game plan based, not based on how much you're paying a guy. So I'm getting the sense that, yes, the Broncos are not satisfied with where they are. They're pleased with what occurred this year, but they do want to improve. My guess would be the highest price free agency the Broncos would bring in would be a corner or a safety or someone for the front seven. Really defense. That's really what I'm saying. If the Broncos are going to spend this offseason, and I think that they're willing to spend, but they want to spend it on the right player. They don't want to just spend money to spend money. I think where their dollar would be best invested, in their opinion, would be to upgrade the defensive side of the football. Because we saw against Buffalo, it is not even close to good enough. And most of the Broncos' success defensively, you have to say it, was just based on the fact that Vance Joseph would blitz and blitz and blitz and bring numbers and bring numbers. And it was effective for much of the season. But you know what's better than having an effective blitz? Being able to get pressure with 4 rushers. Right? Because we could say collectively this Broncos defense was very good, but the individual parts aren't quite as good as people will think that they are. And a lot of this has to do with the insane amount of pressure that Vance Joseph dialed up on a game-to-game basis. So I think the Broncos will be willing to spend, but they're going to spend it in a way that doesn't upset the apple cart offensively. Right? You have on the offensive side of the ball young, really egoless players. And you could say that a little bit on the defensive side. But where the egos get out of control is on offense, right? Quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, highly paid tight ends. These guys start to get egos. Defensively, it doesn't happen as much. I think that the Broncos will spend in free agency on the defensive side of the football. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to look to improve the offensive side. That's where George Paton comes in. I think that the Broncos like what they're doing on the offensive side. They can change a lot of stuff up, mix and match, rotate guys around because they're young and inexpensive. Getting better guys that fit that mold is, I think, what they look to do in the draft. You can't look at the offensive side of the ball for the Denver Broncos and say that this group of wide receivers on the whole is good enough. Okay, if they get either Troy Franklin or Devon Vele, it's not going to be both. It's only going to be one, and maybe not even one. But if you get one of these guys to be kind of a fourth receiver, then good. Cortland Sutton's a 2, and now you have the emergence of Marvin Mims, one of the most positive storylines, I think, from this Broncos season. Marvin Mims' emergence as a real weapon for this offense. So you have him who's, you could do a lot of different things with, but is never going to be one of your top pass catchers. You have Cortland Sutton. I think they're going to retain him. I believe they're going to retain him, but we'll see. But bring in this Tyler Warren makes a ton of sense. It's just Sean Payton has never really utilized the tight end position except when he had Jimmy Graham. And that's why Tyler Warren and only Tyler Warren do I see for the Denver Broncos in the first round, right? I see a lot of mock drafts putting the second, third best tight end on the board to the Broncos in the first round. Sean Payton was eyeballing Brock Bowers this last draft, right? He wanted Bo Nix, but he thought highly of Brock Bowers. That's the level of tight end that I think Sean Payton looks at and goes, okay, I could do something with him. Drafting tight end 2, tight end 3, I don't see Sean Payton doing that. If Tyler Warren is available, and I'm starting to believe he's not going to be, but if he is available, I think that the Sean Payton would look at a talent like that and say, okay. But getting a little bit lesser tight end, I don't see it because Sean Payton is not big on utilizing the tight end position. You saw what he did this year. And I think he was fine with it. I would think a wide receiver, if the right one was available, would be kind of where the Broncos would go if they were go to the offensive side of the football. But I really believe that when Greg Penner, George Payton, and Sean Payton sit down, they will look at the defensive side of the football and say that's where we need to make the most meaningful acquisitions. Can we get a running back in round 2 or 3? Can we get another wide receiver to throw into the mix? can we spend on a second tier wide receiver? Right? Can we get another Cortland Sutton? I think they would be looking at that. But the idea like T. Higgins, Chris Godwin, I don't see it. I don't see them doing that. I think they like what they're doing offensively, and I think their money could be better spent, all things being considered, on the defensive side. And depending on how the draft board falls, maybe going defense first round would be their best move as well. Unless Genty, Warren, these are unique, special players that are worth considering where the Denver Broncos are drafting. If Warren and Genty make it there, different conversation. If they don't, I just don't see Sean Payton settling for RB2, RB3, tight end 2, tight end 3 in the first round just to say he got Bo Nix a weapon in the first round. 719-24-7-1313. Coming up next, talk a little bit about the teams still remaining in the playoffs. Talk some divisional round, Air Force and Army hockey, bottom of the hour here on Extra Sports 1300. Time to plan your big game party by placing your pre-order with Hooters. Get 50 boneless wings for $79.99 or 50 bone-in wings for $89.99. And if you're like, I don't want to host, I want to go somewhere for the big game on February 9th, you can watch the game at Hooters for a chance to win a custom engraved Hooters Colorado Solo Stove. Either way, whether you're hosting, whether you want someone else to host, make Hooters a part of your big game plans. We get one step closer to deciding who will play in that game on February 9th this weekend. Last week, got 4 right, got 2 wrong. Good on Jaden Daniels, bad on Justin Herbert. Those were the 2 games that I missed on, and I look at this weekend and I say the only favorite that I think is going to cover, these spreads are, I think they're too much. Except for the Baltimore-Buffalo game, which is essentially a toss-up. So it's not going to be a lot for Baltimore to cover. I think it will be a good weekend for backing the underdogs. Now, with that being said, that doesn't mean I'm picking all the underdogs to win. But I think Houston, their pass rush, their defense can keep the game close against Kansas City. I think that Jaden Daniels, and what is really impressed me most about Jaden Daniels, I mean, obviously his physical tools are worth marveling at. He doesn't blink. Right? He has had some games where it's really not gone his way, and he just keeps grinding away and keeps attacking, and he doesn't flinch. He doesn't blink. He even compounds some of his mistakes, and he's still going out there with a lot of confidence. If Detroit gets out to an early lead, I don't necessarily think that Washington is just going to go away. If Detroit ends up routing Washington, it will just be because Detroit is that good. It's not going to be, hey, we've, crushed the spirit of this young, plucky Washington team, and now they go away. That's not going to be the case. If Detroit beats them by a wide margin, it will just be because Detroit is that much better, which is a possibility. But I think Washington has the quarterback. They have the mindset. I think they have a chance to be in this game. I like the Rams. Now, the weather forecast I don't love for the Rams. It's going to be kind of sloppy. Don't love that because if it's Saquon Barkley and the running of Jalen Hurts against just Kyron Williams, I don't like that matchup for the Rams. But if the weather holds out even a little bit, I do like the Rams. I certainly think that has a chance. Obviously, we set aside Baltimore-Buffalo because that's the game we're all looking forward to. That it has major implications for the, perception of the MVP. It won't decide the MVP, but, if Josh Allen wins the MVP and he wins this game, then it's like, great. But if Lamar Jackson beats Josh Allen and it turns out that Josh Allen is the MVP, then it'll be a legacy game. It's all that. I think LA, Philadelphia, outside of that, is the most hotly contested. game. I like a lot of the underdogs. The only one I'm going with is LA to win. And I certainly don't feel as confident in LA as I did a week ago. Felt very confident in them beating Minnesota. Don't quite feel that way against Philadelphia. But I'll stay with them. I'll ride with the Rams. I think we get KC, Baltimore, Detroit, LA. That's what I'll go with. 4-2 last week. We'll see how I fare, and you will be able to hear all 4 games this weekend right here on Extra Sports 1300. Tonight, the Nuggets, one quick thing on them. Nikola Jokic questionable with his right elbow injury. Aaron Gordon most likely will not play. I'm sorry. Let me finish my thought, and then I'll get to the breaking news I just saw. Aaron Gordon's probably not going to play with injury management with that right calf. Nikola Jokic questionable. We'll see if he does end up playing. I am very much okay with them erring on the side of caution with Nikola Jokic. It's fine. Jimmy Butler supposed to return from his team suspension. Still very much wants a trade. I don't know that he's going to get one because I don't know that he has the value that he thinks he has on the open market. But Miami and Denver, some semblance of the teams that met 2 years ago for the NBA title, will match up at 6 o'clock. The breaking news. Are you sitting down? Because this is going to shock you. Guess who landed Roki Sasaki? The newest prize Japanese import, the Los Angeles Dodgers. So, that's 3 now? 3 of these highly touted Japanese players that Dodgers will end up having on their roster, of course. Of course, the Dodgers got him. All right, on that note, I bid you adieu. Coming up right now, Jay Ritchie, Dave Toller with the call. Air Force and Army. See if the Falcons can keep up their winning streak against the Black Knights. I will talk to you on Monday.